Coming up on the Authorpreneur podcast, but you get it, I screwed up and I wish I took the time and went back and did this. So this is why I'm recommending that you do this before you write, because it'll just save you a lot of heartache. Welcome to the Authorpreneur podcast. I'm your host, mystery author Amelia D. Hay. On this podcast, I will bring you writing, book marketing, and self-publishing advice so that you can create your dream author business, build your author platform, and be creatively independent. You can find the episode show notes and lots more information on the podcast page at authorpreneurpodcast.com/podcast. Hello, writers. Welcome to the official start of Season 3 of the Authorpreneur podcast, where I will discuss how to outline a story. Just a quick recap. In this season, I will talk about how to outline scenes, sequences, value shifts, characterization, beats, and much more. If you need a quick reminder of what to expect, then check out episode 29 at authorpreneurpodcast.com/episode-029. And if you're interested in reading the transcript or would like links to anything that I've mentioned in the show, then check out the very long blog post or edited transcript at authorpreneurpodcast.com/TAP030. For those of you who are watching this episode on YouTube, you'll notice that I've gone back to an audio-only version of the show. That's partly to do with the fact that today I spent an awfully long time waiting for a number of different, very noisy situations to resolve themselves in and around my apartment, and it got to the point where I need to have an episode done by the end of today so I can schedule it for Thursday. And fun fact, today is actually the 4th anniversary of the podcast. So 4 years ago, on the 27th of September 2017, I decided to make that transition from a predominantly YouTube-focused content to a podcast focused content, but that's beside the point. So today it got to the point where it's sort of sitting around 5 and I need to get something done so I can get something to you on time as I've promised. And I've sort of felt it's actually more important for me to create the content and create an audio-only version of it in place of not having anything out on Thursday, because the scripts are all written, everything's ready to go. I just need to talk in front of a camera or a microphone, and I sort of feel like this microphone without the visual option is the best, because when I filter stuff out in the video, it gives it like a very tinny sound, and I just sort of feel like this option just sounds so much better. Anyway, thank you for putting up with me, but I will focus on getting something out to you instead of waiting for situations like I had today to resolve themselves, because it was just one thing after another and it became increasingly frustrating. But without further ado, let's get on to the episode. Writing to market or writing with genre expectations in mind is often seen as a dirty word, and I think there are a few misconceptions largely to do with confusing the strategy with writing to a trend, which is very different. For the sake of clarity, writing to a trend is all about writing what's popular. An example of that strategy is writing a paranormal romance featuring vampires because they're hot right now. That's writing to trend. By the way, I have no idea whether that's a hot trend, so don't take that as gospel, because it's just an example I plucked out of my mind a few seconds ago. However, writing with genre expectations in mind is all about writing for your audience. I know you want to write what you love, but just hear me out. As a writer, I get it. You need to write what you love, but you also need to write something that others will enjoy and want to stick around for long term. Before we get into the tips, this episode is the first in a 2-part series focused on writing with genre expectations in mind. In this first part, I want to focus on writing with genre expectations in mind for writers who haven't written their first draft and merely have a story idea in mind. This episode will be great for you if you have a story idea or an outline and want to write for an existing audience. Part 2, which will be in 2 weeks, will be great for those of you who have written a first draft or are revising and are concerned there's no market for your book. Don't worry, by the time this episode comes out, that episode will be recorded and edited and will be scheduled on my podcast host provider's website. So why am I recommending writing with genre expectations in mind? Here's what most authors do. Just a side note, I'm including myself in this too. Most writers will write the story they love without considering whether it will have an audience after it's finished. As a result, they have finished a product that's so cross-genre it's difficult to market. In business, it's easier to create a product or service to fill a need or demand than to create an entirely new market. So what should you do instead? I recommend researching the online bookstores for genres that are in demand that you would love to write. Doing this would be easier than bending a story you've written to an existing genre. If you're in the idea phase of writing a book, here's what you need to do. Tip number 1. Read 5 novels in your genre and know its conventions. Choose 5 novels you love with good reviews that are within the category you want to write. As you read through each novel, make notes on what happens in each scene and chapter and notice how the story builds. The second element you will need to pay attention to is the types of characters that appear in each of the books you're reading. At the scene level, make note of how many scenes are character focused, where the cast is reacting to an event, and the number of scenes that are action orientated. And I'm referring to action in terms of fighting, battles, and big explosions. Actually, back to action, I'm not just referring to action in that sense, but scenes, action in terms of something actually happening in the story. There's a difference between fight scenes and I used to have a definition of action written up and I've taken it down. That's very inconvenient. But I'm obviously talking about action in terms of plot, things happening in the story. Whereas when I say character focused, I'm more talking about characters reacting to the events that have taken place. And that is actually referred to as a sequel. Another important element in a story is humour. How is humour used in the genre you want to write? Not every genre uses humour in the same way, and it's important to get it right. Lastly, consider how the stories in your genre end. Do the stories need to have a happily ever after moment? Or is an ending where neither the protagonist nor the antagonist get what they want appropriate? Make all of these notes in a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet. I know I'm a nerd, I love Excel, but for me it's just easier to see all the elements that I need to see all at once. I'm not going to justify my love of Excel, I'm just going to move on. Now look at the information you've collected. What are the common themes and story elements in each book? Consider which of these are non-negotiable. How do you figure that out, you ask? It's simple. Ask yourself the following question. If I don't have this particular element in my novel, will it still fit in this genre? Therefore, if the answer is no, you need to include it in your book. For example, if you're wanting to write a romantic comedy and it doesn't end in a happily ever after or a happy for now situation, then you haven't written a romantic comedy. You've written something else, or your idea is something else, and it's really important that you figure out where your story idea fits and you don't market your story as something else. Because when I write Missing, I thought I was writing a crime thriller, and I was so sure. I marketed the book to an entire book blogging tour as a crime thriller and to the first few ads. And once I started getting mixed reviews, eventually I realized my book was more of a mystery. People kept telling me it was a cozy mystery, and I knew it wasn't cozy because there was swearing in it. And just the way James Lalonde is, he's not a cozy mystery character, and I knew that it wasn't cozy. Eventually I figured out it was actually an amateur sleuth mystery. That moment of having that light come on for me in that way was actually really important because it's changed who I've marketed my book to. And now I have I have quite a few reviews on my book's page where people have read the book thinking they're getting a crime thriller, and they're like, actually it's not really, it's quite slow, it's a slow burn, and that's a mystery thing, that's the pacing of a mystery. So I've screwed up and I paid the price in my reviews, and I also did something with the ending I shouldn't have done. I shouldn't have included the epilogue. I should have left it at a particular point, but I didn't. I included the epilogue as well, and the epilogue sort of changes the story ending, and it's something that happens 6 months after, and it's not really important to the overall story. But you get it. I screwed up, and I wish I took the time and went back and did this. So this is why I'm recommending that you do this before you write, because it'll just save you a lot of heartache. Tip number 2. If you haven't already, create an outline for your story. You don't need to outline every scene in your story. Focus on getting clear on the key moments or plot points. The reason why I recommend that you do this is because it will make the next step much easier. If you are the type of person where writing down the 8 plot points, or however many plot points you have, actually I wouldn't even consider them plot points at this point. At this stage in writing, I would just focus on the key moments of your story and then figure out whether you got a beginning, middle and end and all of that later. At the moment, you just need to write down these key moments in your story and then go on to the next step, because you can always come back later and double check that your story is structured correctly and that you have all of the moments you need and then fill in the detail. And in terms of structure, I would look at it as a guide as opposed to a strict set of rules that you need to adhere to, because it can become quite suffocating if you're freaking out over the fact that your inciting incident happens at 15% instead of 10%. It's not a big deal as long as the story is interesting, and that's what really matters. But back to my notes. Tip number 3, figure out where you are going wrong. I guess these are more steps than tips, but I've committed to it, so I'm going to just roll with it. Now that you've read 5 novels in your genre, highlighted the genre conventions and outlined the key moments in your story, the next step is to figure out whether your story idea fits into your chosen genre. Do your story's synopsis and outline include your genre's important conventions? And these are the conventions you discovered in the first step, where you're reading 5 books and you're looking for, I guess, the common denominators in the story. For instance, if you're writing a romance, do you have a happily ever after or a happy for now moment at the end of your novel? If you don't, I highly recommend that you change this, because if you don't have this element, then you're writing a tragedy. Like Romeo and Juliet is not a love story, it's a tragedy. Because obviously it's a bit of a giveaway in the title, but a romance is about 2 characters falling in love, and that's the focus of it, not what's driving the characters apart. It's the journey to getting together. As you compare your story idea to your list of genre conventions, make a few minor changes to your outline and synopsis as you recognize elements that you need to change. Or if you realize that your story, for instance, say if you're doing the opposite of me, you thought you were writing a mystery, but actually you've realized you have a lot more action and there's less cerebral things going on, and it's more fast-paced, it's more of a conspiracy theory, like an archaeological thriller where they discover something and someone's trying to get their hands on the artifact. If it's a little bit like that, then that's clearly a thriller and you don't need to necessarily change it. So if you go back over and you realize, oh, my story still doesn't fit that genre, now would be a good time to take a pause and think, okay, is there another genre that this fits into? You could have just read 5 books that weren't quite right. If you've heard something useful in this episode that was helpful to you and you'd like to support the show, then buy me a coffee for as little as $2 at buymeacoffee.com/author80hey. To help you get a grasp of the genre expectations, I've created a genre tropes cheat sheet featuring the conventions of the 5 biggest genres. These genres are romance, mystery, thriller, fantasy, and science fiction. I've chosen to separate mystery and thriller because these genres have significant differences. You can download this cheat sheet at authorpreneurpodcast.com/genre-tropes. Before I dive into this list, there is one more thing I want to point out. It's okay to not know what you're writing until it's been written. I mean, take the example that I shared earlier on in this podcast where I wrote a book thinking it was a crime thriller when realistically it's a mystery. If you do get to the end of your first draft and you're starting to revise and you're thinking, I still don't know what my book is, it might be worthwhile finding beta readers and getting their opinion on the story. And after they've finished the story, it might be worth you asking them, what genre do you think this book is? It might be easy to create like a list, like a checklist where they can choose what genre they think it is. So if you're writing in the mystery, thriller, suspense category and you have no idea, you could put all of those elements like mystery, thriller, suspense, other, and just see what people say after they've finished reading your book, because readers will tell you where they think your book sits. They're not always right. Like people recommending that my book was a cozy mystery, that was not right, because I instinctively knew that genre has certain quirks, and I break a few of the rules that are really important to that genre, like the lack of swearing. For instance, if you're writing a romance and, well, you thought you were writing a sweet romance, if there's stuff that happens on the page other than the first kiss, then you're clearly writing something else in that genre, and you should not market a romance that does contain, even if it's fade to black sex, fade to black kissing, that type of thing, you probably shouldn't market to a sweet romance genre, because a lot of people who have religious beliefs may read those books not wanting to see sex on the page, swearing, that kind of thing. So you really do need to keep it sweet. So if you're in doubt, I would just put the book in another category other than that. And that is really important. Be careful with certain genres that have rules that really cannot be broken. Like with mystery, a rule that can't be broken with that category is you have to resolve the crime, and the person who committed the crime, there needs to be some type of consequences for them. Like they just can't get away with it, even if, they can't get away with it. That's really important. Learn that lesson from me. And this genre tropes cheat sheet, what it will be is it will be a list of all the genre tropes on a page. And when you sign up to the email list, as I update it, I will add more genres onto that list. So I'll keep sending you updates. Like I'm considering adding cozy mystery as a separate genre and sweet romance and stuff like that. So eventually I will send off those genre conventions as well. And if anyone shares any genre conventions of any of the subgenres of these, I'll add them to the list and send them off in an email. So you'll get regular updates as well, but I probably won't update it on the podcast. So that's a benefit for signing up for the genre tropes cheat sheet. But I'm going to now read out the genre tropes of the top 5 that I was talking about earlier. So the first is romance. So there's I suddenly realize that the pronouns I'm using are just very ignorant. Sorry. So a sympathetic main character, a strong, irresistible love interest, a meet cute, emotional tension. The relationship must be front and center. And the reason why Romeo and Juliet isn't a romance is because it's really about the feud between the two families. That is front and center, and the drama about that, surrounding that. Even though you see a lot about their romance and them trying to get together, a lot of that is played out in the context of their family war. And I sort of feel like that's what makes it not a romance and a tragedy. So if you're doing a retelling of that, do not put that in the romance genre. So the relationship must be front and center, an interesting, believable plot, a happy ending or happy for now ending. And if you read 5 books in the genre you think that your story idea fits into, you will get a sense of, especially if they're quite popular books, popular, highly rated books, you'll get a sense of which of these genre conventions are actually The second genre on my list is mystery, and usually within a mystery novel, there is a focus on solving the crime. There is also a closed world or isolated setting where the characters cannot leave until the mystery is solved. This isn't specifically referring to a locked room, but usually the crime exists within a situation where people either can't leave or have no interest in leaving until the crime is solved. So maybe it happens at some type of club, like a knitting club, or even if it is in a small town and all the people that are suspects exist in the town. So no one's interested in packing up and leaving because they like living there, and everyone wants to, keep their little secret. So in that setting, but you can also have a locked room, but this is a different type of mystery altogether. The status quo is disturbed by the discovery of a body, and there are always red herrings. Clues are purposely left to distract the reader. This sounds cruel if you're not into the mystery genre, but I think this is the fun of the mystery genre, is the reader tries to solve the crime alongside the amateur sleuth or detective. Characters tend to have a personal reason for killing the victim. You won't see a serial killer in a mystery book because the motives of a serial killer, while they might be personal, it's just different, and that's more something you'll find in a crime thriller. There's a detective or amateur sleuth as a hero, or possibly both, and usually mystery novels have a really strong theme of justice, aka bringing the whodunit individual to justice. Each suspect tends to have their own guilty secret or lie about something, and this is something that makes the discovery of the whodunit a little more challenging, is to figure out who is lying, why are they lying about it, and who is telling the truth. There is some element of comic relief. Usually you'll find comic relief in the cozy mystery genre, but even in my amateur sleuth mysteries, there is an element of comic relief. It's not something I purposefully write into the book. It's just sometimes James will have an amusing observation that he'll make, and that provides a form of comic relief, but it's not something that I particularly put in there. It just happens in the moment in the scene. And they tend to be dialogue heavy, especially cozy mystery is definitely more dialogue heavy. The third genre on my list is thriller, and the focus is on action. A crime is usually committed by a master villain, and that master villain has a MacGuffin, it's just a term that means an object desired by the master villain, and that's usually some type of power for corrupt reasons. Clues and red herrings are puzzle to solve with false leads, and this is where it does cross a little bit with the mystery genre, but it's the difference between mystery and thriller is there's a lot of action, a master villain. There is a moment where they have a speech in praise of the villain, a moment where a character talks about the brilliance of the antagonist, or even the antagonist talking about how great their plan is and how they're going to succeed. Usually within a thriller there is a double agent, so a character who says one thing but does another. This character impacts the protagonist's mission. Usually they change sides from the protagonist team to the antagonist, or they've clearly been working for the antagonist the entire time. And there is a ticking time clock element to the story as well. Like, they need to get everything done in an insane space of time. And the stakes as well. There's life and death stakes for the protagonist, possibly from the get-go. Their life is in danger. Whereas in the mystery, the danger sort of builds. And there's a false ending. There's an ending where you think it's all good, and then the villain comes back and strikes again. The third genre is fantasy. So you have a reluctant protagonist, a magic system. Usually a fantasy novel is journey or quest based. Usually a conflict of some type will force an everyday character out of their ordinary world. Within the fantasy genre, the main character has a struggle to master something, Or the journey isn't easy, like with The Hobbit, because he's not mastering anything, it's just the journey is difficult. So fantasy obviously it's what you associate with it the most is an immersive fantasy world. More often than not, it's medieval inspired. There's a cast of complex characters. It's usually a large cast, and there's a good versus evil theme with an all-powerful villain. So the last genre on my list is sci-fi. As you'd expect, it's set in the future in a world that's similar to ours. And like fantasy, there is obviously a protagonist with a cast of characters. There's a focus on technology with this, and it's in the name, obviously. And once again, sci-fi is also adventure or journey-based. Much like Star Wars and Star Trek, they're both journey-based storylines. There is also a focus on transportation, especially in certain subgenres within the sci-fi umbrella. I don't actually read much sci-fi, so I can't really comment about what type of subgenres would be transportation heavy. I guess space opera is obviously the one that I've understood the most, but that's just purely me going off watching Star Wars. There's also an environment or world where the story takes place and how technology has affected it. There is in the story an evolution of the language in some way, whether it's evolved, where technology has helped it evolve, or usually there is a evolution of the language. But if you are writing sci-fi, you need to check whether these particular elements are appropriate to your subgenre of sci-fi, because sci-fi is a very broad category. And obviously there is elements of culture as well. You get introduced to new cultures. This seems to be a very big thing with very popular sci-fi series, is that concept of being introduced to new cultures. Also, it embraces physics. No matter if you're writing soft or hard sci-fi, there is an element of physics involved in the story. And once again, much like thriller and fantasy, there are life and death stakes for the main character, and obviously the cast as well. So that concludes the list of genre tropes. I did spend quite a bit of time researching these because I don't read in all of these genres. It's not possible for one person to read so broadly across all of these genres. So I did my best to try and research all of the genres that I didn't know, as well as the ones I did know. So I hope this helps you understand the main 5 genres. If you do have something that you would like me to add to one of these genres that I've missed a trope that's important, or you would like to add something to expand on something that I've said, then send me an email via my website and I will add this to the genre tropes cheat sheet and email list. To write a story with genre expectations in mind, you need to take these 3 steps. Step 1, read 5 books in your genre and know its conventions. Step 2, create an outline for your story. And step 3, figure out where you're going wrong. And after you take those 3 steps, the 4th step would be to continue on with fleshing out your story idea, outline your novel if that's something you do, and then start writing the first draft. But it wouldn't hurt after you finish outlining and fleshing out your story to go back and just double check you haven't steered away from the genre. But if you're writing a book just for fun, then obviously you're not listening to this podcast and you're just writing your book for fun. But if you do want to write for readers and eventually make enough money for you to pursue a career as an author, then you need to find a way to write for an existing readership, but also love what you write. So it's important that you find that mix. Even though I could write romantic comedy, I don't do it because I don't love it. Like at first I like it, and then I really don't like it. It's why I write mystery. I find I'm more interested. It keeps my attention for longer. You get it. I like it. But what if you've already written a novel or 3? The short answer is you need to tweak your story. In the next writing tip episode of the Authorpreneur podcast, I will discuss the steps you need to take to rewrite your story with genre expectations in mind, and I will provide you with a set of actionable steps just like this episode. If you want to download the genre tropes cheat sheet and sign up to the email list to get updates, go to authorpreneurpodcast.com/genre tropes. And if you want to add anything or correct any mistakes that I've made in any of these genres, come on over to the blog post at authorpreneurpodcast.com/TAP030 and share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for listening and happy reading and writing, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Authorpreneur podcast. If you love this episode, then hit the subscribe button and leave a review on your favourite podcasting app. I'm your host, Amelia D. Hay, and I'll see you next week for another episode.